Hello, and welcome back to Boring Sleepy Historian for Sleep. Tonight, we'll travel back to medieval Europe and quietly explore how peasants survived the coldest winters. Winters then were not like the cozy images we sometimes imagine of snowy villages and roaring fires. For most people, the season was a time of hardship, hunger, and cold. So let's take a slow journey into the past and drift into the rhythms of medieval winter life. For peasants, the cold months were the hardest part of the year. Summer and autumn were spent working endlessly in the fields, planting, harvesting, and storing food. By the time winter came, there was little farming to be done, but survival became its own kind of labor. The harvest stored in barns and cellars had to last until spring. Every loaf of bread, every sack of grain, every salted piece of meat was counted carefully. If the harvest had been poor, the fear of running out was constant. Families rationed food, stretching what they had and hoping it would be enough. Houses were not well insulated. Most peasant homes were made of wattle and daub, wooden frames filled with mud and straw. Roofs were thatched, and drafts crept easily through cracks in the walls. There was usually just one room, with a fire in the center for cooking and heat. Smoke from the fire filled the house, stinging the eyes and lungs because chimneys were rare. Sometimes there was only a small hole in the roof to let smoke out, but it didn't work well. The warmth was uneven. The side closest to the fire could be hot, while the far corners of the room were freezing. Families slept close together on straw mattresses, often with animals nearby, not out of affection, but because the animal's body heat helped warm the space. A cow, goat, or chickens might share the same roof, turning the home into a crowded, smoky shelter from the cold. Clothing helped, but layers were limited. Wool was the most common fabric, and peasants wore woolen tunics, cloaks, and hoods. Undergarments were made of rough linen, if they had them. Furs were rare for ordinary people, as animal hides were valuable. So peasants often relied on simple woolen wraps, patched and reused over many years. Clothes were mended again and again, and sometimes handed down through generations. Gloves were uncommon, so people's hands stayed rough and chapped from exposure. Food during winter was simple and repetitive. Fresh fruits and vegetables were gone, except for hardy storage crops like onions, cabbage, and turnips. Bread was the main staple, made from whatever grain was available. If wheat was scarce, peasants used rye, barley, or oats, which made heavy, coarse loaves. Porridge was common as it stretched grain supplies further. Meat was rare for peasants, but if a family had slaughtered a pig in autumn, they salted or smoked the meat to last through the season. Cheese, butter, and eggs were eaten if animals still produced them, though winter often reduced supplies. Dried peas and beans were important, providing protein when other food ran out. Water could freeze, so people drank weak ale, brewed at home, which was safer and easier to store. Meals were small, plain, and eaten with care because running out of food before spring was one of the greatest dangers. Work did not stop completely in winter. Men mended tools, repaired fences, or carved wooden items for use or trade. Women spun wool into yarn, wove cloth, and patched clothing. Children helped gather firewood, which was always in demand. Firewood was precious, and burning too much too quickly could leave a family without heat. Some poor peasants collected dry dung or peat to burn when wood was scarce. The hearth fire was never allowed to go out if possible. Relighting it could be difficult, and a warm ember was a lifeline against the cold. The coldest winters were especially dangerous for the elderly, the sick, and young children. Frostbite and hypothermia were real threats, though people did not have words for them then. They simply knew that sleeping too far from the fire or going out without proper clothing could mean not waking again. Communities sometimes helped one another, sharing food or shelter, but everyone was stretched thin. Survival was a shared burden. Holidays provided rare relief from the gloom. Midwinter celebrations like Christmas were important markers of time, bringing people together with music, feasting, and worship. Even the poorest peasants tried to make the season brighter, baking special bread or sharing a little ale. For a moment, the hunger and hardship were set aside. These gatherings gave people strength to endure the long months of cold that still lay ahead. Winter also shaped belief and imagination. Long, dark nights, howling winds, and snow-covered fields fed tales of spirits, demons, and supernatural creatures that haunted the season. People gathered close to the fire, telling stories to pass the hours, mixing fear with comfort. Religion also guided them, with prayers for protection against the cold and the hunger. Faith was a way to endure as much as food or firewood. Travel in winter was rare. Roads turned to mud or ice, and snow made journeys dangerous. Most peasants stayed within their village, working on small tasks and waiting for the thaw. The isolation could be heavy, but it was part of the cycle of the year. Winter was endured rather than enjoyed, survived rather than celebrated. When spring finally came, it was a relief. Fields thawed, animals gave birth, and fresh food slowly returned. But the memory of winter lingered. Families counted themselves lucky if they had made it through without losing loved ones. Every season carried risk, but winter was the harshest test. Looking back, we see how resourceful medieval peasants had to be. With simple tools, little comfort, and limited food, they found ways to survive. They stored grain, preserved meat, mended clothing, and relied on one another. Their winters were long and bitter, but their determination carried them through. So, as you drift toward sleep, remember the quiet strength of those who lived centuries ago. Life for medieval peasants was not easy, and winter was their greatest challenge. But they endured, year after year, season after season. Their story is not one of comfort, but of resilience. And with that thought, we close our journey into the cold nights of the Middle Ages. Good night.